Hey there, this is Chris Buckholz, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Ravel's Bolero and Schumann's Rhenish Symphony. These are two of the most often asked for excerpts on tenor trombone auditions because they demonstrate the high register really well. If you don't have the chops to play these, then you probably can't play in a symphony orchestra at the level that you need to. And, I think to me, not being a conductor but having worked with lots of conductors, it's really more important that you play the notes. And sound is really kind of secondary. That doesn't mean that you can have a terrible sound and win a job. It just means that I can think of many players who have very bright sounds, and I thought, man, they will never win a job. And sure enough, they won a job because they are accurate, in tune, and musical players. So really the priority needs to be on notes. So when you're thinking about equipment for these excerpts, you really need to play on things that you can get the notes out and make them sound great, rather than what's going to give you a huge sound, but you're going to miss the notes on it. So for Ravel's Bolero, I have no problem playing that on my regular tenor or regular mouthpiece. For the Rhenish, I definitely play that on an alto, not because it necessarily makes it easier for me, but because it's a much better blend with French horns. It's definitely the right horn choice in my opinion, and that is why I play the Rhenish on alto. It also slots just a little bit better. It's a little squirrely on the high E flat range when you're playing it on tenor, and it needs to be soft and smooth. So for all those reasons, I play the Rhenish on the alto. So we're going to start with Bolero, and this one really, I think you have the most leeway musically of any excerpt that you're probably going to play on the audition, save your solo piece. And that's because there's a lot of different versions of how these solos are played. And I don't think as a conductor you probably want all the solos played in exactly the same way. It's a long piece and there are a lot of solos over the same material, and it can get boring if everybody is playing it in exactly the same way across the instruments. So I think you have some latitude with this one. You'll hear me in this excerpt playing with some swing feel, which I have borrowed from an Ian Bousfield recording with the Vienna Philharmonic, which I really like. And I use a fair amount of vibrato. I think that's appropriate for French music. You're definitely going to hear that in the bassoon and saxophone solos in this. And it's also something that one of my great heroes, Glenn Dotson, would have used. So here's Bolero. I'll play it for you now, and you can get an idea of what I do with it. So that's my version of Bolero. Definitely not standardized. Lots of guys don't play with swing feel. There's definitely a more kind of middle of the road version, and I'm doing this to express my own personality. I played Bolero once for a good friend and colleague of mine, Richard White, at the University of Mexico, and he said, "Why are you playing it like Joe Alessi? Why don't you play it like yourself?" And I thought, yeah, I've been working on playing this thing with a swing feel. Why don't I try that? So I did that for him, and he was very pleased with it. So that was my way of playing it in a way that expresses my personality as a switch hitter, jazz classical player. And Ravel was very interested in jazz when he wrote Bolero. He actually wrote it for a jazz trombonist in his mind named Leo Arnaud. And so I think that it's not historically out of the ballpark to think of this as kind of a jazz piece with a little bit of swing feel to it. I like a quarter note equals 64 to 74 as a range of tempos on Bolero. I personally, most of the time, practice it at quarter note equals 67. So now on to the Rhenish Symphony. Again, I like to play it on alto because it's better tuning-wise, partial series-wise, and it's a better blend with French horns than trying to play it on tenor. And I practice this at a quarter note equals 54. Most good recordings out there are going to be somewhere around there. They're not going to be much faster, and they're not, hopefully not going to be much slower than that. I think of wedge breathing every time I'm taking a breath, particularly the first two breaths that I take. It's very important to me to get in wedge breaths on those. And I'm just trying to make it, as smooth and beautiful without a whole lot of, you don't want to use vibrato on this because you're playing with French horns. There's not a whole lot of dynamic variation on it. So this is kind of, as a high register piece, this is the polar opposite of Bolero, where you have a lot of latitude to do musically expressive things. This needs to be very, very staid. I always think of monks walking across the floor of the cathedral in Cologne. That's really what this movement is about, is that particular cathedral in Germany. And just kind of floating across the floor. The robes are so long you can't see their feet. They're just kind of gliding across the floor of this cathedral. So here is my version of the Rhenish Symphony. So to recap, both Bolero and Rhenish are on orchestral audition lists because they are a real challenge in the upper register. Bolero shows your musicality, Rhenish shows your accuracy and smoothness in a soft legato environment. And these two excerpts need to be a part of what you're doing all the time. You really need to practice these things for years to master them. And make them a part of your daily practice diet. If you can't handle them every day, then maybe you do them every other day as part of your hard day, easy day practice alternation. But they need to be a regular part of what you're doing, so that when you get into an audition situation, it's not like, oh man, I gotta play Bolero. If it's like part of your warm-up routine, no big deal. And the same thing with the Rhenish. If you have any questions, please email me at cbuckholz@unm.edu. And thanks for listening.